At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a benefits notification that said a newborn had been added to my husband's health plan. The name field was blank, the birth date was that same day, and the primary parent listed wasn't me. I stared at the tiny blue dot next to dependent added, like it was a bullet hole in the page, and I couldn't tell if the trembling came from me or the phone. I live in a leafy pocket called Maple Glen, Pennsylvania, in a ranch-style home that smells like lemons when I open the back slider because I wipe the counters too often. We have a gray sectional with a dent where our 6-year-old Leela tumbles herself into cartoons, and a dining table I refinish myself from a Facebook Marketplace rescue. I run a small e-commerce and home refinishing business out of the garage cabinet doors lined up like ribs to dry, an orbit sander on a pegboard, a hacked-together photo booth for listing hardware. My husband, Mark, is a paramedic who swears he sleeps better during daylight. He keeps his boots under a bench by the door with the laces tucked in, and I used to tease him about that tidy paranoia. It turns out paranoia would have been a gift. I blinked at the message, reached for facts, and felt my fingers close on nothing. Mark had told me he picked up a swing shift at Montco EMS covering a crew whose kid was sick. He said the supervisor would owe him one, which could mean earlier holidays off. That detail was supposed to sound normal. I have been married 7 years, and I know the voice he uses when he wants me to root for him on principle. I wanted to. The infant icon on my screen said otherwise. The first lie I ever told him was about how many chairs I could finish in a weekend. I said 8 because it sounded entrepreneurial and cute. I can do 5 without hating everyone by Sunday night. We met because his squad came to the hardware store where I consulted part-time and carted a heart attack across the paint aisle. He asked if I knew how to tell cherry from mahogany. I told him by smell and the way the grain drank stain, and his fear-lit face softened into curiosity. I loved his hands on the wheel of our lives. He never minded sawdust in the backseat. We had Leela within 2 years, then a long, fogged-out season when I almost lost my mother, and we absorbed a credit card with the deductible. Money became a third person living with us. It didn't pay rent, and it shed the worst kind of mess. The red flags didn't march in. They accumulated like dust on baseboards. He started buying the fancy gas at Wawa because their points doubled after midnight, and he swore it made the rig run smoother. He'd come home with a wood smoke smell I couldn't place, like someone had burned a cinnamon candle in a drafty room. He changed his passcode from our old anniversary date to a number I didn't recognize, shrugged when I asked, and said his supervisor told them to rotate passwords. He was jumpier when the doorbell camera pinged. He'd angled the phone away, not secretive so much as ritualistic. I found a parking stub from Linden Lofts, Trenton in the glove box, and he told me dispatch routed them there for a call, but the time stamp was 1:43 a.m. and he had said they'd been slammed in Abington. I chose to believe exhaustion makes memory mush. When I tried to raise it, he did not shout or accuse me of paranoia. He did something worse. He treated me like a nail he could set with a rubber mallet. He told me the life mattered more than any single hour, who could survive loving a man who saw too much. He told me he'd always tell me if anything really important had happened. He told me we were on the same team. I saw myself from the ceiling, a woman counting screws to make sure the shelf wouldn't tear out of the drywall. When the benefits notice came in, I screenshot it in 3 places and forwarded it to my own email like it might vanish if I blinked. I checked the portal again. The baby's namespace still showed a dash. The birth date stayed the same, and the dependent effective date matched. The primary contact for the dependent was not me. The system displayed a phone number I recognized by the last 4 digits. Pace. I waited 20 minutes to see if the entry had been some kind of glitch. some newborn pre-enrollment for a crew member in crisis. It remained. I then pulled up his location in the Find My app and it returned nothing. He had switched off location sharing 3 weeks earlier. He said the app made his phone hot. I spent the next hour adding facts to a little notebook I keep for orders and paint formulas. I wrote the alert time. I wrote the number last called on his phone because at 3:09 a.m. when everything buzzed again, it was his plug-in charger jostling on the nightstand and it lit the screen enough for me to see the call log. The number was unfamiliar and had a 732 area code New Jersey. I wrote down the wallet charge from our joint card of $47.62 for fuel and goods and the timestamp 1:12 a.m. I wrote down the diaper brand he bought last month for his cruise fundraiser to donate to the women's shelter and told myself this could have a benevolent explanation. I didn't write down that my heart did the soft animal shiver that it does when you slam on the brakes and nothing hits you, but for 3 seconds your body believes the end has arrived. The public scene was supposed to wait. I could have handled this in quiet. I thought, people jerk cars when you slam on the brakes. But the public scene found me at Saturday's kindergarten soccer practice, where Mark had promised he'd make the last 20 minutes after his shift. I had the printed benefits page in my tote, the edges of the paper bent from being handled like a holy card. The whistle blew and the coaches called the kids for popsicles. Our friend Jessica waved at me from the bleachers with a pity I didn't understand. I thought my face looked normal. Mark showed up in his navy pants and a gray hoodie, hair damp, a posture that set him apart from every person who had slept for 8 hours. He hugged Leela like he deserved her, and then walked back toward our cluster of parents and put his hands in the signal of small surrender, palms out. I had the paper in my hand. I didn't plan to show anyone. I planned to fold it into my purse and ask him on the ride home. But Jessica asked if everything was okay, because I had ignored her twice, and the weirdness of that flooded me with heat. I held up the page like I was asking for help picking a paint color. It was ugly. I felt the parents swivel. I felt someone's inhale catch. I felt a father I barely knew step back like the page contained chemicals. I stated calmly that the portal had added a dependent and I didn't know who that child was. I said I needed him to explain so that I did not go to the benefits office on Monday and accuse anyone of fraud. His face telegraphed nothing. He told me we should talk at home, and a father I barely knew muttered that home starts where papers get signed. I saw the coach's wife turn away like privacy could be returned to me if we pretended hard enough. If the practice field counts as a witness stand, then the witness who mattered was a man I didn't know well. Mr. Patel, whose daughter wore number 9, spoke softly in my ear while our kids shrieked across the grass. He told me he was the overnight manager for the municipal parking deck downtown and that he had seen Mark twice this month around 2:30 a.m., stepping out of a lift near Linden Lofts across from his garage to unlock a gray Honda, our second car, the one I usually drove in daylight. He said Mark then moved the car into the deck and left again with the lift. He told me this as if he wished he weren't saying it, as if he wanted to test whether telling me the thing would make it untrue. He had seen me refill bird feeders and thought of me as the woman with the red rake. He said he thought I should know. The first reveal I could not bend into benevolence was not technically the benefits page. It came in a strip mall next to a nail salon and a pizza place, where a row of brass flickering mailboxes were all that separated normal life from quiet lies. The gray key Mark keeps on the ring with his roof rack wrench fits a private mailbox I never knew he rented. I know because I borrowed his keys to run to Ace Hardware for more painter's tape, and the keyring slid into the seam of my tote, and when I pulled it out, an envelope from the UPS store fell out with a renewal reminder addressed to his name alone, P.O. Box 1427. I took it there on a weekday when I knew he'd be sleeping and asked for a hold. The clerk told me they couldn't share contents, and I agreed I simply wanted proof of rental and signed my name on the clipboard as an authorized receiver, a thing the clerk said must have already existed because it accepted my ID without a blink. Inside the black metal box was a chase statement with a credit card I didn't know about, a key fob stamped Riverview Storage, and a folded card with someone else's name. Erica do any day now. If I told you I confronted him immediately, I would be revising history to make myself brave. I put the items back. I copied his statement with my phone camera because I wasn't sure I was the kind of person who could hold a lie in her pocket without it burning through the lining. I drove home in a calculus of whether to throw away our couch or swallow a gallon of paint. I sat in the driveway and smelled the lemon wipe residue and told myself I would at least ask about the P.O. box. He woke when I opened the garage door. He had that drilled deep medics startle and then the performative softening. He asked if I needed anything, and I said I was fine. In my head, I argued with myself about whether fine is its own betrayal. The money pressure had been escalating in small, stupid ways that justify the worst choices. We had a payment plan for a hospital bill last winter when I had a thyroid scare. The nodule turned out benign, but occult follow-up scans aren't free. My mother's knee replacement went sideways, and we floated her until Medicare aligned. Mark's student loan servicer switched names and repayment calculators, and the auto debit jerked an extra $164 in April and then apologized in May. That apology didn't cover anything at the grocery store. We trimmed streaming services until we forgot which password belonged to what. Mark worked more nights, and I said I would take on more kitchen cabinets, and instead discovered the cost of custom-matched paint was higher than the listings could bear. We weren't drowning, but the tide licked our ankles constantly. I sometimes think if the newborn had not existed, the icon glimmering on the benefits portal like an accusation, I might have explained away everything else forever. But the child had been added, and I knew where the key fob in my palm wanted to go. Riverview Storage is behind a car wash that sells scented trees and hot pink buckets. The unit number on the fob matched Building B, Unit 117. The concrete corridor smelled like clean, wet dust, and the roll-up door squeaked where a line of rust ran like a scab. I lifted the door and saw a low lamp, a folded crib, a rocker with the cushion still in its shipping plastic, and a stack of appointment cards from a women's health clinic in Trenton. The appointment cards tracked a due date that matched the benefits portal. On the chair rested a tote with Target receipts for diapers and formula I had never seen in my own home. There were photos tucked in a book, maternity portraits at Washington Crossing State Park, willow trees, and a man's hand at the edge of the frame in a way that made me nauseous. The hand had the little white scar near the thumb from when Mark slashed himself opening a box of Roman IV tubing 3 years ago. I did not cry. I recorded the serial numbers of a new white noise machine and a baby monitor because you can't argue with serial numbers. I took photos of everything, including the rental contract that had his signature, in a version that skipped the loop on the K the way he only does when he signs at work. The contract application listed his employer as Montco M's, his phone number, and the alternate contact as Erica L., with a 732 phone number. I texted the number and then deleted the text. It wasn't a request for anything. It was a message that would have sounded like a stone thrown into water. I went home and froze the joint credit card. I opened a separate account at a local credit union with my business income. The manager was gentle and clinical when I told her I needed to separate funds to protect our child's routine expenses. She asked if I wanted to put a credit freeze on my file as well, and I said yes. She handed me a sheet with the global fraud alert case number. and told me to keep it in a safe place. I felt ridiculous for feeling grateful that something even a number was mine. On Monday, I called his HR department and asked whether spouses can add dependents unilaterally. They told me anyone on the plan could add a dependent, but if fraud were suspected, the benefits office would review. I told them I needed a review. I quoted the time of the alert, the last 4 digits of the number listed, and the effective date. They recorded my statement and gave me a ticket number. I thought of myself as a person who had opened tickets before, reports of site outages and delivery delays. This did not feel like a ticket. It felt like documenting a shipwreck that had already sunk. The second major reveal crashed through when I went to pull the title out of our fireproof box to check lien details. The folder had always held our deed copy, Mark's paramedic license renewal, and the letter confirming our HELOC limit from when we thought we might add a second bathroom. A new folder sat there with a more expensive paper stock, and we would purchase for ourselves. It was a refinance application. It had my name on it in a handwriting that hunted my loops and failed. The notary's stamp had expired the previous month. The line for contact, if spouse unavailable, listed Mark's mother, who had mentioned once at Thanksgiving that she could get things notarized for friends. The refinance sought cash out enough to pay off debts I didn't recognize. The lender's pre-approval letter had been sent to the P.O. box. I didn't know whether to scream or call the fire department to ask if you could burn paper in a safe way. Instead, I drove to the notary's listed address, a shipping store that did not provide notarizations on weekends, and on Monday I asked them if they had handled any documents for my husband. The clerk told me kindly that they weren't permitted to share that. He also told me in a whisper that the notary stamp had been refused yesterday by someone who caught the expiration date. He said the person was in a rush. The third reveal came from the least dramatic place, our Nest thermostat. It records motion patterns when you walk by, and the timeline for Saturday night showed the living room motion sensor activating at 12:44 a.m. to 18 a.m. and 4:02 a.m. I had been asleep between 12:30 and 2:30, a shallow drift broken by that benefits alert. Mark had supposedly been on shift. I checked the garage door app. It had opened at 1:07 a.m. and closed again at 1:10, as if someone had coasted silently in and out. Our neighbor has a camera pointed at their driveway. I asked if she'd seen anything odd, and she, blessedly practical and oblivious to embarrassment, told me she saw our gray Honda slip into the street, block its license plate from her camera with a piece of paper, and leave. She wrote the time down. She wouldn't invent that. She added that she had seen him come home at dawn with paper grocery bags and carry them inside while I slept. She added a small detail I cannot unsee. He came back to the car to retrieve a single, tiny orange cap, the kind that protects the tip of a bottle nipple. She has grandkids. She knows those caps. I made an appointment with a family lawyer 2 towns over so I wouldn't run into anyone from school. I brought the Nest app screenshots, the storage unit photos, the benefits page, and the refinance file. The attorney did not use words like fault. She used words like timeline and custody schedule and asset freeze. She asked about safety. She asked about drugs and drinking and whether my husband had ever threatened to harm himself or our child. I answered honestly. He drinks socially. He doesn't hit walls. He had never threatened anything beyond asking me to pick my battles when I was anxious about the house. She then spoke about consequences in a voice as neutral as hardwood. She told me to send a certified letter to the benefits office documenting the suspected addition and to request they freeze plan changes pending review. She told me to consider a safety plan that didn't include telling him immediately, because money moving covertly would not stop just because I had grown brave. We did not stay invisible. A public scene arrived again in a place I would not have predicted, our church basement, during the monthly free clothing drive where I donate outgrown coats with the buttons all still attached. The church is a place where you can count on the coffee being weak but hot, and where gossip is supposed to be tamped down by scripture and fail anyway. I arrived with a box of little dresses and a bag of pot lids the church kitchen had misplaced 6 months ago. The room smelled like powdered sugar and Lysol. Mark's cousin was there and recognized me and asked too brightly where Mark was. I said I wasn't sure. Someone else asked if I was excited, and when I looked blank she told me the family had been buzzing about big news. I felt all that powdered sugar settle into my lungs. I pulled the printed benefits page from my tote again and showed it to the pastor's wife when she touched my elbow and asked if I needed anything. I stated that a dependent had been added to our plan without my knowledge, and that I required help making sure no further changes could be made without both signatures. She walked me to her office like I might faint. She said she had an old friend in HR at Montco General and asked if I would consent to her making a call. I said yes. She dialed and passed the phone over speaker. The friend, whose name I will not use, said that overnight shift records for the date in question showed my husband had clocked in and out except the rate he'd been assigned was documented on the opposite side of the county at the times our garage door opened. She could not share more, she said, but she encouraged me to request audit logs formally. If this counts as an independent witness, she was one. My fourth reveal was less cinematic but louder. I went to the bank to ask about a withdrawal. I didn't remember a $900 cash withdrawal from an ATM near a motel I had never visited. The teller pulled up the camera stills associated with the ATM and turned the screen toward me carefully, asking if this was my card. The image showed the back of a man's neck in a hoodie and the corner of a hospital badge. The timestamp matched the diaper receipts in the storage unit. The teller printed the withdrawal record and wrote a case number at the bottom. She suggested I put a travel notice on my card to flag local cash pulls. I asked if that would help. She said it would slow things down and trip human eyes. Sometimes that's all you can get. If you want a single image where even denial couldn't stretch skin over bone, it was a photo in that storage unit I returned to with a clipboard like a building inspector. The photo had been taken in a delivery room. A baby's hand pressed against a man's thumb. The man was careful not to be in the frame, but his thumb held the little crescent scar like a signature. The bracelet on the baby read Baby L, followed by a surname that wasn't mine. The date matched the benefits portal. The next photo, taken minutes later, showed a white blanket with blue and pink stripes and the corner of a woman's shoulder with a birthmark like a comma. I knew then that I was not in a triangle. I was looking at a parallel life. Someone will ask why I didn't scream then. I don't scream well. I set boundaries formally because that's a language I understand. I emailed the benefits office a written notice stating I believed a dependent had been fraudulently added to the plan and requested an immediate freeze pending verification. I copied the HR contact the pastor's friend had named generically, and I asked for audit logs of who logged into the portal and from which IP at 2:47 a.m. I called the lender on the refinance pre-approval and asked them to mark the file case number, flagged. I sent a registered letter to Mark notifying him that I had opened a separate bank account for household essentials and that further joint funds would remain in the joint account until we could meet with counsel. I then sent him a calm text that dinner would be in the fridge and that I wanted to talk when he woke. In my head, I rehearsed lines about children needing predictability, how money didn't spring from the ground even if you clapped. When he came into the kitchen, where I was slicing strawberries into a plastic container for Leela's lunch, he stared at the counter as if it might announce something. He told me he had meant to explain, and then he reached for the wrong word and said he had meant to protect me. He said the other woman had been in a situation. He said his name was on a birth certificate because the father had left and he knew the baby would need insurance. He told me it didn't mean what I thought it meant. He swore the newborn would not take anything from us. He said he would fix the refinance, that it had been a misunderstanding at the notary. He said he hadn't told me because he knew I would make it ugly. He said that last part without raising his voice, but it blew something out of my chest anyway. It wasn't screaming, but I felt a click in my spine like a deadbolt turning. I told him that protecting me would have looked like honesty before signatures. I told him we had a child who would read our faces for truth for the next decade, and I would not have her learn to parse half grimaces. I told him there would be no further movement of funds without my signature. The freezes stood. I told him that a letter would arrive regarding plan changes, and if he tried to remove me or our child, the hospital would receive my complaint. I wrote the case numbers on a sticky note and set it next to his palms like evidence laid on a courtroom table. He told me I was making a mistake. I told him mistakes don't come with receipts. He slept at his mother's that night. She texted me a series of emotional bargaining chips that I dropped into a folder labeled Keep. She told me I was breaking up a family over a situation. I considered forwarding her the benefits page and the nest logs and the photo of the newborn bracelet. I did not. I instead emailed her a list of bills due with amounts and exact days, told her the joint account would cover the mortgage and utilities, and that I would handle groceries and Leela's school expenses from my account. I told her any contributions should go to Mark directly. I would not accept money that wasn't mine. I slept badly. The morning came like a lawsuit, a procession of proofs. The aftermath was not clean. HR did not call me the next day. They called in a week with a bland statement about investigating. The lender didn't decline the refinance until 3 weeks later, when the notary expiration and a complaint about signature irregularities crossed paths. I received a thin letter that felt like a reprieve but read like bureaucracy exhaling. The storage unit remained in his name. He kept paying it. I thought often about that rocker in its plastic and the brashly cheerful white noise machine. I pictured someone else's baby turning its head toward the sound, and I hated that I could feel tenderness there. The newborn did not ask to be born into a lattice of lies. Love is not permission. We told Leela only that Daddy had a new schedule and would be in a different house sometimes until we figured things out. She accepted that with the resilient greed of children for any story that does not feel like their fault. She still asked in the car on the way home from first grade whether her family counted as real if her parents didn't share a bed. I told her families are the people who stay, and then I drove past our street and took a long loop through the houses with glitter pumpkins because I needed to cry without shaking her belief in stability. I hate that I might have complicated her map of love forever because I didn't see sooner. 2 months on, people still looked at me like they were trying to gauge whether I was bitter or strong or both. I stopped caring. The lawyer drafted a temporary custody schedule, miserably clinical and spelled out to stop cruelty in advance. We signed it. I made a Google Calendar for pickups and drop-offs and kept the emotional noise out of the fields. The benefits office finally called to say the dependent had been verified as eligible, but that my complaint had prompted a requirement that any changes be signed by both plan adults going forward. This was a win that felt like a bandage on a bone. My brain still pointed to gaps in the day and asked if I should be washing bottles somewhere else. The last time I saw him outside of logistics, he was carrying a cardboard box out of our garage into the hatch of his car, and I watched him tuck it into the space like he never wanted anything to jostle again. He looked thinner around the collarbones. He saw me seeing him and let the corners of his mouth lift in something like apology. I didn't nod. There's no choreography for a parallel life ending its secrets in your driveway. He drove away, and the garage sensor ticked off after 6 minutes of no motion, and that somehow hurt more than any words being reduced to the absence of a body in a beam. I still run my little business in the garage. The work smells like polyurethane and iron filings and gives me goals that sit still. I started keeping tighter books, more merciless inventory notes, more granular cost tracking, because numbers don't tell you everything, but they do not lie by themselves. When Leela is with him, I sometimes drive past Riverview Storage and count the roll-up doors. I have not gone back inside. I do not need a new photo of a baby I don't owe anything to and still can't help picturing when I hold a measuring spoon above pancake batter. I sometimes wonder whether I'm supposed to demand a test to something on paper that tells me if the dependent is his, if the story he tells himself in the dark about why this made sense is rooted in biology or in cowardice. Would you demand the test now, or does the answer only dig the hole deeper for a child who didn't climb in? On nights when the house is too empty, I open the benefits portal. The blue dot next to dependent added is gone because the addition has been fully processed. There's no icon for the subtraction of trust no field for a spouse removed from belief. I read the little lines like they are a poem written by a bureaucrat who loves infants and paperwork equally. At 2:47 a.m. the icon had blinked at 2:47 a.m. It had altered my life into something I recognize and don't accept. I sometimes picture the storage unit again, the lamp on the floor, the crib, the rocker in plastic. In my head, the white noise machine is turned on without a baby, and the soft quantum hiss fills the space like an ocean you can't see. I imagine the door rolling down, the light snuffed, and the hiss still there like wind in a conch shell, like maybe both lives are happening at once mine, and the one that never needed a key fob stamped 117.